Yo, this is Chuck, and welcome to the How to Defeat Dudes video blog. So now, what I'd like to discuss for this blog is 5 things that I think any school that wants to call itself a martial arts school needs to teach. Now, before I move into the actual discussion of this topic, I'd really like to remind people that I draw a distinction between a martial art, a combat system, and a ring sport. And what I'm talking about for this vid is purely schools that call themselves martial arts schools. I'm not so concerned with ring fighting gyms and or combat systems. This is purely martial arts schools that I'm talking about. If you're not exactly sure what the differences between those three are, then I'd really recommend you check out the video that I made about how to choose a martial arts school, because I talk about the topic in depth in that vid. Anyway, on to the topic. Number 1, how not to get into fights in the first place, meaning non-violent conflict resolution. Meaning for people who are too passive and who tend to be bullied, teaching them with a specific aim of showing them how to stand up for themselves and giving them the confidence to stand up for themselves. Or for people who are too headstrong, too arrogant, or too aggressive, teaching them with the specific aim of getting them to calm down, be more humble, and be more objective. More than anything else, the number 1 way to defend yourself is knowing how not to get into violent situations to begin with. That means for passive people, knowing how not to get bullied. For aggressive people, knowing how not to piss other people off. And then also for all of the normal kind of people who fall between those two extremes on the spectrum, showing them what I like to call the levels of self-defense, and showing them how to be kind of situationally aware and also aware of themselves, so that they can read situations and work their way out of them before they get too hairy. Number 2, bone conditioning. Now, I am very much aware with the way that martial arts are in the modern world or in the States or whatnot, but I also think that you need to let people know that usually the first time somebody punches someone else really hard in the head with their fist, they break their hand. Part of that is just because they don't actually know how to punch effectively, so they end up hitting with the weaker knuckles. But also a big part of that is the fact that all these little tiny bones in their hands just aren't built up for that kind of impact. So if you want to be able to punch somebody without breaking your hands, or even kind of knife hand strikes and this kind of stuff, you have to build up your bones to be able to take the impact. So that if anything breaks, it's on the other guy and not on you. Now granted, there are some martial arts that may not necessarily have a lot of punching, and for those martial arts, you may not necessarily need it. Like for example, if you look at capoeira. Capoeira has little to no punching, in so much as I've learned from training in it. Beyond that also, if you look at Aikido, Aikido's the same way. It's primarily a defensive martial art, and as such you're always taking the other person's energy and then turning it back on them. And as such, you really don't punch much. So maybe for those martial arts, you don't need it. But hey, let's face it, the reality of most street fights is that punches to the face happen, both in terms of giving and taking. And as such, you need to have hands that are strong enough to take it. At least just in my opinion. Number 3, multiple opponent scenarios. You guys are probably pretty doggone sick of me talking about multiple opponent scenarios. You're like, there he goes with the multiple opponent scenarios again. He's always talking about multiple opponent scenarios. And that's true. Whenever I'm talking about self-defense stuff, I do always talk about multiple opponent scenarios. But the reason for that is because multiple opponent scenarios really happen. And I mean, let's face it, at least half the time the dudes get into fights, it's not just because they're angry, it's because they're angry and because they got their boys to back them up. Or a lot of the times that people try and rob you or molest you or whatever, it's because they got other people around that they think can help them out. And yes, while you can adapt one-on-one fighting strategies to multiple opponent scenarios, it's a whole lot easier if you simply study and or teach multiple opponent scenarios as a separate thing itself. Now, in the martial arts school that I came from, we learned all about that stuff as we were coming up in rank, but just because you may not have learned it at the school that you come from doesn't necessarily mean that you can't teach it. Basically, it's just a matter of doing your homework, maybe even just going online, doing a bunch of reading about it, looking at the credibility markers, the people that are publishing the stuff that you're reading about it, taking it in, and then mixing it with your own background knowledge and what you know about martial arts to find an effective way to teach it that works. And that actually goes for bone conditioning as well. Even if you weren't raised, quote unquote, in your martial arts school doing bone conditioning, it's not that hard to learn how to actually do it. And then you start doing it yourself, and then after you get a sense of how you do it yourself, then you teach your students. Number 4, how to give and take shots to the head. Now again, as aforementioned, I know there's a myriad of martial arts systems where there is no striking and there is no hitting to the face at all, but the fact of the matter is, if what you're teaching is self-defense, then people need to know how to take those shots. Because at least for dudes, when you get into any kind of a fight, the first thing somebody's going to do is punch you in the face, or at least try to punch you in the face. And 1, you have to know how to read and recognize punches. 2, you absolutely have to know how to take that hit and then shake it off. I mean, because really there's nothing to be afraid of in terms of getting punched in the face. It's not necessarily life-threatening. Don't get me wrong, it sucks. As with a lot of stuff, the only time getting punched in the head is really, really dangerous is when people are afraid of it. So they freeze or they don't think or, they don't respond in the way that they should. After you've been punched or even kicked in the head, it's kind of a lot like going to the dentist. Meaning, yes, it's not exactly fun or something that you may dread, but it's not life-threatening. It's not going to kill you. And then, of course, once you're used to taking shots to the head, an untrained punch or an untrained kick is really kind of slow and easy to see anyway. So they may not even be able to catch you. At the same time, I'm not saying that everybody has to study boxing or something. I mean, I personally came from an Olympic Taekwondo background myself. And in Olympic Taekwondo, we actually don't do punches to the face. We do kick each other in the head, though. So in the least, you know what it generally feels like, and you know how to get your head out of the way of something that's moving at it pretty quickly. And of course, number 5, the legality of getting into fights. Now, I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that you need to be some kind of a friggin' lawyer just to teach martial arts. But I think that in so much as in teaching it, you're giving people tools that can not just defend themselves, but could actually really, really hurt someone if improperly applied. You have a responsibility to let them know that there could be legal consequences to their action if they misuse what they know. As for myself, pretty much any time I'm teaching self-defense types of things like eye gouges or ear boxes or strikes to the throat and things like that, I always let my students know that there is the potential for long-term damage or seriously hurting them. And as such, you really have to ask the question, do you really want to let yourself get into a situation where you would have to use this stuff on somebody? And the answer, of course, is no. Which again cycles right back to point number 1, knowing how not to get into fights in the first place. So anyways, guys, that's it. That's all that I've got to say about this one. If you've got any questions or any comments, please feel free to just write them below, and I'm more than happy to respond to anybody as they come up, as always. And just to recap, those 5 points are: number 1, how not to get into fights. Number 2, bone conditioning and building up your fists and your blocking surfaces to take the impact of hits. Number 3, multiple opponent scenarios. Number 4, how to give and take shots to the head in one way or another. You just got to cover it. And number 5, the legality of self-defense situations, getting into fights, and knowing martial arts. Now, again, if you're a martial arts instructor and there's some of these that you don't teach or you don't cover, I'm not trying to hate on you in any way, shape, or form. All I'm saying is that it would probably be a very good idea for you to introduce them into your curriculum in one way or another. Even if it's just kind of a light covering of the topic, just to kind of plant the seed in people's thinking, so that people who want to know more can research and learn more. And the people who may not have ever thought of it can, if nothing else, be basically aware of the ideas. Okay? That's it. This is Chuck. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Yosh!